Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Moranis.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Rob Neyer, host of SABRCast with Rob Neyer, and you are listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
I always love when we get to have Rob on the show because, one, I like Rob, and I've always loved his work. We've had him on, gosh, this might be the 6th time now, I think, maybe. It's a lot. But I just love being able to talk baseball with someone who's an expert. You're also a commissioner, which is pretty cool, and you get baseball at a level that a lot of us don't get a chance to because you're always in that marketplace. So I suppose I'd like to start by asking you maybe 3 questions about baseball and your experiences therein. You may recognize this format. What's your first baseball memory?
My very first baseball memory is, I don't know if this really counts. My first memory of something like baseball is playing in the backyard of my friends who lived right across the street from us in Fargo, North Dakota. So I would have been 6 or 7.
Wow.
And we played with a plastic bat and a tennis ball. And the idea was to hit the ball over the fence. So someone had to go into the next door neighbor's yard to retrieve it. Or maybe that was what we were trying not to do. I can't remember, but I just remember taking a whack at that tennis ball. My first memory of real baseball would be a year or 2 later when we lived in a little town called Buchanan, Michigan, just across the state line from South Bend, Indiana. And my best friend, Joel Proud, was a huge sports fan, like I was, but he had some history with the teams in that area, which I didn't. But I remember the White Sox being on the radio and listening to and hearing the names of Dick Allen and Wilbur Wood and probably Bill Melton. I never became a White Sox fan, but I have some vague memories of hearing those games on the radio.
Wow. That's great. 2 memories for the price of 1 question. I love it. I bet you probably know the theme of the next question, but I'm going to put a slight spin on it. I'm going to go screwball on you. Your favorite player who is not U.S. native and isn't a native Spanish speaker. So, basically eliminating the Caribbean and all of the U.S. Who's your favorite player?
Well, that narrows it down quite a bit. I mean, I feel like I'm probably going to forget somebody obvious, but for me, the easy answer is Ichiro. And I never, even though I had season tickets, I never became a real Mariners fan. But Ichiro was so easy to love because he was so unique. There's never been anybody else quite like him, and I mean, I suppose at this point in my life and his, what I appreciate most about him was not that he was a great player, which he was for most of his career, or at least much of it, but that he so completely embraced the history of the game, which so few players do. It's so rare for a player to have any interest in the history and go to the Hall of Fame, as he's done, I believe, many times. It's just a phenomenal thing. And so I can relate to him, or I can admire him in 2 ways. We share that thing, that passion for history. And it also makes him different than almost every other player. So that alone would be enough to make me a big fan. And plus, he was just a lot of fun to watch. And I got to see a lot of it living in Seattle, living in the Northwest. And I've always thought it'd be fun to go through all my old scorebooks and count things like how many times did I see Junior Griffey play? How many times did I see Randy Johnson pitch in Seattle? Yeah. How many times did I see Ichiro play right field? Just things like that. I have this big whole basically bookshelf full of scorecards and scorebooks, but I've never done anything with them. Someday I'll sit down, take a day, and just sort of make my way through them and make some lists and have some fun.
Yeah, that's great. It gives me a lot of questions to think about. One of them is his Ichiro's father started collecting the Ichiro Museum items before he was even a major league player or even a major league Japanese player. So maybe that history sensibility was put into him by his dad. What are your thoughts?
Hey, this is Pete. Real quick, I just want to let you guys know we are proud to announce our official support of Save the Brave, a certified nonprofit 501c3 with a charter of helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. Here's how you can help. Go to SaveTheBrave.com, click on the link on the website, and my recommendation is this. Subscribe. Give them $20 a month. You've got subscriptions that you can turn off right now that you're not using that are $20 a month. Swap that out. Get involved. Let's help these folks out.
Sensibility was put into him by his dad. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it makes sense. I actually haven't read much about his childhood. I think I read the same story you probably read, but that was a few years ago, and I've forgotten almost everything. I would love for someone to write an English language book about him, a sort of a full-length biographical treatment, and maybe he doesn't want that to happen, which is why it hasn't, or maybe it has and I just missed it. There might well be a great book in Japanese about him, but one of the formative books for me when I was first really beginning to explore the literature was Sadaharu Oh's memoir, and it's quite good. And I think that Ichiro, for an American fan, is the only real analog for O, in the sense that we've got a hitter here who played forever and compiled these incredible lifetime totals that everyone knows about. I mean, there were other great stars in Japan and have been since, of course, but most of us don't know anything about those players, but we all know O because he set the home run record. And similarly, we all know about Ichiro. Everybody in Japan knows about him. We all know about him. And I would love to read a book either by him or about him that's well done and really drills into some of these things, because he really is a fascinating character. At least I think he is.
Yeah, no, he for sure is. I mean, just his approach to the game, like any of those guys that are elite for a long time, they're Tom Cruise comes to mind. They're so singular in their focus. It's not about being determined or being resilient to everything. They just are, the program that they run to keep themselves in peak physical fitness, to constantly improve what they're doing or maintain what they've got. That I hate to say Zen-like, but that commitment to constant maintenance of your program is, at that level, it's rare.
But what's really fun for me about Ichiro, and this might be just because we don't know enough about him, but in my mind, to this point, he doesn't come with any of the negatives that, you could throw Tom Brady in that same box, right?
Okay.
Tom Brady is a machine, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He's not a robot, but I mean, he's able to be amazing year after year after year, well past the point when we would expect that. And the same is true with Tom Cruise. Obviously, I have an incredible amount of admiration for the way that both Brady and Cruise have built their careers and maintained themselves at the very top of this their incredibly difficult professions. But then Tom Cruise has the whole Scientology thing.
Yeah.
And Brady has this whole weird thing where, if you eat the right kind of camel's milk, you're suddenly going to be a great athlete. No, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And yet he hawks these products and makes these claims in various places. I'm sure he might have been on the titanium bracelet bandwagon or something. I mean, there is a certain purity about Ichiro. And again, this might be because I don't know enough, but there's a certain purity around him that almost nobody else carries around them. They carry this aura of success, but there's baggage, and I haven't found any baggage with him yet. That's why I like him so much.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. He lacks the baggage. He has all of the, I guess he's sort of Jeter-esque in that as a player, you fail to find fault, and whether that's excellent management of image or just the purity of his character. You're right. I can't think of a single negative instance of anybody talking badly about him ever.
Right. I can't either. I mean, the only thing there was, he refused to speak English in interviews, essentially, even though by most accounts his English was perfectly fine. And he didn't want to do it. I think because he was worried about being misunderstood. And there were some stories about his personality behind closed doors that were at odds with his public image, perhaps, but they weren't really negative. It wasn't like he was running around and dropping his penis on guys' faces, which you've heard about other players.
Right. Yeah.
There wasn't anything really ugly about it. So I'm able to sort of maintain that image of him in my mind as someone who was essentially a good-hearted, good-natured person who also accomplished all these incredible things.
The moment you said penis and doing anything with it as a player, the name Zeke Mowat came to mind, and that's I guess the difference, right? Is Zeke does one thing that maybe that's his one infraction in his whole life, but gosh, it at least in my mind, instantly triggered. That's what made me think of that is reprehensible behavior in the locker room towards people.
I don't know that story.
It's not worth repeating.
Is this a football player?
Yeah.
Okay, it's coming back to me. Okay,
back when
anybody can look it up, I suppose.
Yeah. And
it's hard to forget. You can't forget that kind of stuff.
No, right.
No matter what else the person does, it only takes one image like that, and you're stuck with it.
Yeah,
forever.
Yeah. So let me see if I can get us segued away from that, because I don't want to talk about
away
that.
From penises. Okay, sure. Away from penises? Yeah, let's get away from
penises. I mean,
totally
we'll talk about anything on the Break It Down show, but
totally okay with being away from penises. Any second now.
Is there a player that comes to mind currently who is better than replacement level, who has kind of that Ichiro non-traditional approach to hitting or pit, like Hideo, not to use another Japanese player, but he's the first one that came to mind. Hideo Nomo's windup was definitely atypical. Is there someone out there who approaches the game at a high level and differently that jumps out?
I will say no, but only because I am not as in touch with the game, and especially the visual part of the game, as I was 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. There's sort of been two things have happened in my life that have taken me away from the visual part of things and that having that awareness. One was the birth of my daughter 4.5 years ago, which left me with many fewer hours to just sit and watch a baseball game on TV. And the other was becoming commissioner of the West Coast League 2 summers ago. And that has basically kept me for the same thing. It occupies most of my baseball attention for 3 months every season, all of June and July and half of August. So I still follow the game fairly closely. I obviously am on Twitter way too much, as anyone who follows me on Twitter knows. Not proud of that. And I listen to baseball games almost every single night on my At-Bat app on my phone, but I almost never watch the game. So when you ask me who does something differently, I'm hard pressed. If I thought about it a while, I could come up with somebody. The player that I admire, having said all that, in these days is Sean Doolittle, because of all the things he does off the field, and his willingness to be open about his interest in labor issues, and not just millionaire baseball players issues. His interest in animal rights, his interest in bookstores, for gosh sakes. I mean, this season, every road trip, as I recall, every time he went to a new city, he visited a new bookstore.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, this is what I would do if I was him. It's exactly what I would do. So, and I've had the pleasure of talking to Sean. I interviewed him for my last book, and he was great, but a very likable guy. And it's been wonderful to sort of follow his off the field stuff. I think he's having a pretty year. I don't even pay much attention to his stats because I don't really care
how
well he's pitching. I just want him to be happy and pitching in the major leagues for as long as he wants to do that. And I look forward to seeing what he makes of his life. I mean, he's in a position as a baseball player and a pretty well-paid baseball player to make a real difference in the world. And I think he will.
Yeah, that really, to me, as I've grown older, matters a whole lot more. As you were talking about Sean Doolittle, I was thinking about Stephen Piscotty and his family's challenge with ALS and his efforts to draw attention and money towards just a horrible disease. It's so individual in the way it manifests in somebody. I have a friend that has ALS, and he asked, and everybody agreed, and they made it happen, to be traded from the Cardinals back home to Oakland so he could be closer to his family and deal with that. And look, not that everybody wouldn't take the opportunity to do that, but you certainly wouldn't blame a guy for saying the best way I can help is to maximize my income, get me to New York instead, and pay me more money or whatever it is. But he instead, just continues to sort of stay below the radar and focuses on playing baseball. And I guess that, to me, makes you a better baseball player, because you're more than just the game. You're such a great representative for your community, for your family, for the A's, and for Major League Baseball in general. This is not just about baseball. It's about life, and I like those kind of players.
I do, too. I do, not that I spend a lot of time thinking about this, but I do worry. Well, I shouldn't say I worry. I pessimistically believe that the great majority of fans don't really care about those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. That most of them, all they really care about is whether their team's winning and whether player A is performing. And once he stops performing, nothing else really matters. Mm-hmm. Certainly there's definitely a subset of people like you and me who pay attention to that stuff and care. But I mean, look, in all honesty, I'm not a fan of a particular team anymore. If I were, I probably would care about that more than anything else too. So I get it. I certainly have been that kind of fan in the past. I got in trouble a few years ago because I sort of made the devil's advocate argument that players who go, pitchers in particular, who miss games because to attend the birth of their children are letting the fans down. I don't know that I really believe that, but I was sort of getting in touch with my former fan. Now, of course, it's just something that everybody does. But there was a time, not that long ago, when nobody left their team to be at their children's birth. Right. Nobody. It just didn't happen. Right. And then there was a stretch of years. It'd be interesting to find out how many. You could research this, when some guys did and some guys didn't.
Yeah.
And now there's actually a policy in place, and if you don't leave, you'll be considered a terrible person, quite frankly. My objection to that is we should allow everyone to make their own choice. And if a player, and presumably his wife, decide that for whatever reason he should stay with the team and make that start, let's not give him any grief. That's their decision. It's not yours.
Yeah.
But we've reached a point in that particular tiny part of our culture where you're now players are expected to leave the team for 2 or 3 days and be with their spouse, which there's really nothing wrong with that. It's just not what I grew up with. And so I've sort of had to make that adjustment. And now it's just seen as it's just something that happens in baseball. And if it's best for the people involved, I'm all for it.
Given your family situation and your job as a commissioner, I guess this third question, which I'm positive you know which question's coming, just for my friends who are listening in the audience, I'm taking and reapplying Rob's own SABRcast model for his open of his show, 3 questions with his guests, and giving it to him. So what's your favorite way today to enjoy a baseball game?
Well, I sort of already gave it away. Right. It's funny because I ask that question basically every week, as you pointed out. I've done 24 podcasts. Well, 24th comes out soon. I'm not sure when you're going to drop this one, but we're up to 24 basically. And I've asked that question in almost every podcast. There's a couple that were sort of special episodes, but otherwise, yes. And the answer generally are the same answer that I give when somebody asks, which is, really, I still love to go to the ballpark, although now I love I actually prefer going to a West Coast League game because it's cheaper. Everything's cheaper about it. I can relax a little more. And the other thing, I love the At-Bat app. I just absolutely love flipping back and forth between games. Basically every night after my daughter goes to sleep, or earlier if my wife's got that chore that night, I just go straight to the At-Bat app. I look for games between contending teams, and then I narrow it down and find the one that's closest to being over, if it's close, if the score is close, and then I listen to that until it's over, and then I flip to the next game like that. I just sort of work my way down the list until I finish up with the very last game that's being played that night, and that never gets old. I feel so blessed to be able to do that. It just ties me right back into being a kid and getting on my radio and searching for a game to listen to if the Royals game wasn't on. So it's so much fun. For all of the fault I might find with Major League Baseball generally, and with Bud Selig and Rob Manfred and everybody else specifically, I'll always be grateful for At-Bat.
Yeah, I guess this is where I get a chance to pop up on the soapbox for a second. I live in Southern California, and I follow most closely the Dodgers, but also the A's a little bit because where I grew up. And I'm so disappointed that we're not just a couple of months into this thing. We're years into this contract that denies most of Southern California the right to watch the Dodger team because Spectrum holds the rights. And God bless, they've got a contract. But I know that when this kind of thing happened in Boston at the time, Senator Kerry said, absolutely not. The Red Sox belong to everybody. So I could use the At-Bat app and would certainly buy it and do something similar, I think. But because I can't watch the team that I want to follow the most closely,
right?
I'm absolutely disincented to purchase it. So I don't. Right. I gladly would give them the $100 a year, and I would pay more attention to the game. But because of this pig-headed business mistake, I'm more disengaged, and I don't get to watch 2/3 of the baseball that I might otherwise watch, and not just the Dodgers. I can't. I won't spend money on something where, the main feature is denied to me. And I don't watch enough cable TV to even warrant having a space. Like, I'm the perfect guy for At-Bat because I would follow what baseball, and if I wasn't listening to a podcast, I would listen to yesterday's game when I drove around LA. But I can't because...
So I thought that the At-Bat app was just the audio. I thought that the video was a whole different product. I could be wrong about that.
That could be true, but as far as I understand, I can't even. I've tried to listen online to the radio version, and hear Charlie Steiner call the game, and I can't seem to get it. So maybe the At-Bat radio version, and I know like the next day the game is available, but come on, that's Well,
I think that the app that I use, the At-Bat app I use, I have access to every single game home and away broadcasts, regardless of what market I'm in. So anyway. If you just don't want to give your money to MLB, I completely get it. But if you just want to listen to the game, I think that option should be available to you. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. I mean, even when the games are broadcast in certain fashions, like if it's a game on a certain channel, it still won't be like it'll get blacked out. So it's really restrictive. Either way, it sucks. I wish baseball would fix it, and maybe we can get Diane.
No, the blackout rules are a travesty.
Yeah.
I think you can indict literally every single major league owner for a crime against their fans with their blackout policy, because the amount of revenue they're generating, extra revenue because their blackout policy has to be tiny relative to everything else.
Yeah.
So it's hard to understand how they can possibly justify doing that to their fans. Hey, look. Just between me and you, not a big fan of billionaire capitalists for a lot of reasons. And here's another example. I mean, I would just ask someone to defend this policy to me. I don't think you can do it other than naked, pure, the pure principle of unchecked greed. I can't see any other explanation for it. Yeah. Am I wrong? You're not a communist or anything. You tell me.
No, I think it's I don't. think that these policies, $15 beers, any of these things are measured in a way that you can reliably say it generates more revenue. I think you could make a pretty strong argument that it generates less, especially with attendance numbers not booming. And we'll say that. I know a lot of people that would otherwise go to baseball games, at least 1 or 2 a year, that don't go because, we talked about this last time, it's become, the cost of a major league game has become so problematic that people don't want to get fleeced for $40 parking and $15 beers. And, just all of that experience has really, I think they've reached the maximum of what's possible. And maybe we'll, the crazy baseball fans who don't care about how much money they spend and have those means will continue to do what they do. But I know they get a whole lot less of my money now because of the greed to me is apparent.
Right. No, they're absolutely. And I do try to remember every so often, and I'm reminded every so often that the one thing that Major League Baseball hasn't done is put ads on the uniforms for 99% of the games. They do put ads on uniforms when they play in other countries. Explain that one to me, but otherwise they don't. And honestly, I would probably give up on watching baseball on TV at all once they put ads on the jerseys, because it's bad enough with all the ads on the outfield walls and all the things that sort of assault your vision while you're watching a game on TV. But once the ads go on the uniforms and you can't avoid it, they lose. That's when they're going to lose me.
Yeah.
And it's not a right or wrong issue. It's purely a personal taste issue, essentially. I know a lot of people don't have any problems at all with ads on NBA jerseys.
Yeah.
Certainly with soccer kits, where they're plastered. But I just can't watch it.
Yeah, and I guess I should also say most of how I enjoy the game really isn't about watching the game anymore. Anyhow, I'm much more, and I'm positive we discussed this too. I'm much more a fan of how the team is constructed, and thinking about how player development has been. It's much more specific and planned now to go through the Dodgers farm system or the Reds farm system, and how they bring these players along with diet and their approach to launch angle hitting or whatever it is. We've got so much more data now. This is part of what fascinates me, is how you process the data, directly correlates to how there should be a strong correlation between teams that process data better than others and the performance on the field. There's teams that struggle, and then there's the team like the A's that just processes data at a higher level than, say, the Mets. The Mets should, by all accounts, be a great team because they've got the means to have a first-class New York City level analysis department, but clearly they're not able to do that, and so they struggle to put a reliable product in the field. That, to me, is much more, that competitive part is much more exciting. Like the Giants won the World Series 3 times in 10, 12, and 14. They were never the best team going in. The random nature of playoffs, it almost makes it like, just get there and see what happens.
It helped the Madison Bumgarner pitching a huge percentage of innings at least one of those years.
Yeah. And it worked out. I mean,
yep.
Like that bet pays off until it doesn't, and you're like, oh gosh, oh no. But you also had Pablo Sandoval hitting 3 home runs in a game, a ball hitting the third. And I'm not trying to disparage the Giants. I love what they won.
I get it. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, but it's like, actually, let me ask you this. So I think about World Series level baseball as having championship moments where there's like a collection of, let's say, throughout the 7-game series, if it goes 7 games, there's maybe 1.5 to 2 moments in a game where if this goes A, then team X will win, and if the outcome goes B, then team Y wins. And it does seem like overall the better team tends to get those moments. You can have luck and other things contribute. You can't account for that. But when Aroldis Chapman is pitching, you've got your guy in there, and you bring in your right-handed hitter that crushes left-handed pitchers. That's a championship moment. The game is on the line right now. Everything else is sort of secondary. That's sort of how I see it. The team that stacks up the most championship moments, Boston last year with the Dodgers, they just won all of the championship moments.
Right. Well, I would agree with that, except that we it's hard to know what those championship moments are until after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And I also am a big believer that especially when you have two great teams playing each other, who wins those moments is almost completely random.
Okay.
So I'm sure that there are Giants fans. I don't think many people who work for the Giants, frankly, but Giants fans who think that they had some magical formula that happened to work in October in those 3 years when they won the World Series. But no, it was just one of those incredible happenstances that make sports so interesting. Just as it was wildly improbable that the Royals would go to two World Series in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I would wish I were smart enough to do is come up with a list of the 50 most unlikely things that have ever happened in baseball history. Bobo Holliman pitching a no-hitter, the Royals going to 2 straight World Series, the Giants winning 3 in 5 years after not winning over the course of whatever it is, 50 some years. I love stuff like that. For some people, when you say that something was unlikely, you don't want to use the word random. People get upset about that word, but unlikely, when you say something's unlikely, people think you're demeaning an accomplishment. But that's not really the point. I think that we should celebrate unlikeliness, because if all that happened were the likely things,
yeah,
why bother watching? If we know it, I wouldn't watch a game if I knew what was going to happen. I never watch sporting events that I've recorded and know how it ends. It doesn't interest me. Once someone tells me how a game ends, I don't watch it. I stop watching.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Once someone tells me how a game ends, I don't watch it. I stop watching.
Improbable moment to add to the list. Jeff Treadway, who never had a multi-home run game except for one time when he hit 3 in one game. Jeff Treadway.
I did not know Jeff Treadway hit 3 in one game.
Yeah.
And Mark Lemke being a hitting star for a week or two. Remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike Sosa hitting 362 8 weeks into the season. Like, how did he do that?
There's all sorts of great stuff like that, and that's why it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has their thing, right? Like, this is the first time someone ever has done anything in the last 100 years. Like, Lorenzen, the guy from the Reds, he hit a home run and played center field, and pitched in the same game. First guy since Babe Ruth to do that. So
and got the win, right?
And got the win. Yeah, absolutely. A while back, the major leagues had an issue with urban black kids coming in and playing the game. And Torrey Hunter said, my son is going to be the last black player from the U.S. to ever play. Something has changed. That doesn't appear to be true. And that's probably a hyperbolic statement just from the start. But do you have a sense, has Major League Baseball's effort to invest in the inner city and baseball, has that worked? I mean, because sometimes big organizations go for big solutions and they don't reliably come through a lot.
Well, I think that the effort was, and I'm not an expert, I have done some research. I wrote about it a little bit in my book. For many years, the only real effort, at least publicly, was the RBI program. And what I wrote in my book was that if you actually look at how much money MLB spent on that, there's no way they could have been accomplishing much. My opinion was, and still is, that RBI was basically public relations. And that anyone who knew anything about it realized they weren't spending enough money to make a real dent in the numbers. Now, we can argue all day whether it's even something they should be doing. Look, if a kid in New York City wants to play basketball instead of baseball, who are we to tell him he's wrong?
Yeah.
But I think that I think it's an effort worth making, if only for PR reasons. Sometimes when you're running businesses, you have to think about that kind of stuff. That's part of it. That's part of the business, is maintaining good public relations. So I think it made sense for MLB to engage with that question. I don't think it was practically designed to actually change anything. Having said all that, they seem to have gotten the message.
Yeah.
And I think this is a Rob Manfred deserves some credit for this. My impression is they spent a lot more money on getting not just inner city kids, but kids everywhere to play more baseball games, and not just baseball. They're really focused on bat and ball games, whatever those might be, just to get kids thinking about hitting and catching balls.
Right. Basically.
And it appears to me that they made some inroads. Now they're not doing it. I'm not naive enough to think that they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. I think they're doing it because they recognize that the best way to create baseball fans is to create little baseball players who grow to enjoy the game when they're 6 or 7 because they're playing it.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
Yeah.
And so but long-term thinking is tough.
Yeah.
As Bill James told me, it's antithetical to human nature. So you have to admire, at least somewhat, Manfred and MLB for putting at least some effort into this program that really isn't likely to pay off for years and years.
Right.
What you hope is that you capture thousands of 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds now, and then you've got them in 20 years when they can spend money. That's kind of the point. That's why they're doing it. They're trying to maintain the viability of their business by creating new baseball fans. And selfishly, I'm glad, because I want there to be a healthy baseball world too. It's what I do for a living.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank God for that, because you're great at it. It's always awesome to hear your thoughts and read your books. You guys should read Powerball. I really love that book and that conversation. The game continues to move forward, even from your conversation you had in that book with all of us. We really shifting is not an emerging thing. It's an established thing, and we're trying to figure out if we need to deal with it. Swing path and launch angle. We have so much data now. It's and I think you just talked about this on one of your. Everybody should check out the SABRcast. First off, if you guys like baseball at all, SABRcast is awesome. It's available on iTunes, all those platforms. I listen to it myself all the time. You guys were talking the other day about swing path and just the ability to have a better understanding of what works when you hit the ball. Rich Gossage can be mad and talk about all those other things, but and old hitting instructors can talk about swinging down on the ball and chopping at it. But the reality is that to survive today, how many players have taken and revamped their swing and become something bigger and better than what they were previously. It's remarkable how different the game is now than it was 10 years ago.
It's completely changed, and which there's nothing wrong with change. Baseball has always changed, and will forever change. There's even if you wanted to keep it in some sort of stasis for decade after decade, you couldn't do it. The world's too complicated for that. What my only complaint, really, my fundamental complaint, is that the change doesn't seem directed at this point. It seems that baseball is just letting things happen with no real plan for how things should be. I don't think ultimately that works. Or even if it does, it's certainly unprecedented, because in the past, baseball has always done things when they saw the game changing, and naturally, organically, they would say, wow, this is kind of scary. Maybe we should think about what's happening here and see if we can guide the game to maybe a more generally balanced, not always, but generally more balanced place. And right now it's not happening. At least it's not happening in a meaningful way. I think certainly MLB, by directing their partners, the Atlantic League, to make some pretty radical changes to their game, and then see what comes out of that. Baseball is taking the very first steps toward directing change and ideally creating a more entertaining sport. But boy, it sure is taking a long time. We saw these things coming 2, 3, 4, years ago, at least. Smart people saw it a long time ago. I didn't. It wasn't until the launch angle is one part of it, but the biggest reason for the difference in the game is how hard pitchers throw and how lively the baseball is.
Right.
Everything else is just tinkering around the edges, including launch angles. It's almost all the baseball and the pitchers throwing 95. That's pretty much tells the whole story. And baseball's done nothing to grapple with either of those things.
So my sense that baseball is sort of self-regulating and that the advantage moves around because, certain skills are devalued, that may not be as accurate as I want it to be.
No, baseball doesn't balance itself. It doesn't work that way. Everybody said it would, right? Remember when the shifts first started coming in 10 years ago? And how many people said, those silly shifts, just watch these amazing hitters figure out how to beat it.
Yeah.
Hasn't happened at all. It hasn't even begun to happen. Not even the guys who don't hit home runs. Because at the same time, everybody figured out that you're still better off trying to hit the ball as hard as you can.
Right.
Than trying to push it the other way for a single. I mean, Ichiro was great. Tony Gwynn was great. Rod Crew was great. Those guys were great. It was a lot of fun watching them do what they did. But there just aren't many people who can do that.
Right.
Or frankly want to. It's hard to know exactly how much of it is skills based and how much of it is culture based. I read about this in my book too, as you know, but getting players to change what they do is incredibly difficult. And they might have a good point. They might be right about not changing, or it might be that they're just stubborn. It's hard to say for sure, but either way, the reality is that players haven't changed. They haven't adjusted to the shift, and they're not going to.
Yeah, you're right. But coaching does work off of this data, right? Spin rate and all of these different things. What percentage of that impact is happening? I mean, Chris Taylor went from being a middling player to a player that can start on a major league ball club, partly because he's improved his launch angle. And I'm just using him as an example. There are a lot of players like that where they were middling, struggling, fledgling, and they did figure out how to hit over a shift. It's just that, the cost of that success 20 to 25 times a year is equals a 262 average and not enough walks to make the game. Well, you talk about this a lot. There's not enough people getting on base in enough ways to really create exciting scenarios and tension with speed and motion on the field. That's a lot of 3-outcome baseball.
Well, that's right. And also fewer ground balls means fewer plays made by the shortstop. Fewer great plays made by the shortstop. All that comes along with that. It makes for a less interesting game unless your primary interest is seeing the ball go over the fence or seeing strikeouts. And there are fans who love that kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong. I remember having a conversation with Gabe Kapler when we were colleagues at Fox Sports, and he said he loved it. He loved the 2 outcomes, strikeouts and homers. He lived for that, essentially that duel, which has a grand tradition in Japan. By the way, I think they even have a name for it, which I could remember what it is. But I'm sure Gabe's not the only one.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are plenty of fans out there who would be perfectly content with strikeouts and home runs. Having said that, that's not how baseball became the national pastime.
Right.
It just isn't. I mean, you can say that you like that part of the game, and I'm not going to say that you're wrong because everyone has their own taste, but historically speaking, the game that people grew to love was one that included all sorts of different things happening on the field. And look, there was a time when there were almost no home runs. I wouldn't argue for that either. And in fact, baseball boomed in the 1920s when Babe Ruth changed the game with his power. So clearly fans love home runs, but I think they tend to love all the other things as well, or at least they love the variety that includes all the other things. And I've actually seen a study, which I'm not smart enough to understand, but I've seen a study suggesting that the attendance drop in the last 2 or 3 years is actually tied to fans preferring a game with more variety. And I think if that's true, and people can prove that and show that to stakeholders, television people, MLB, the Players Association, then maybe that's a lever where you can start to make some changes.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and I know that players like Ricky Henderson are special, and that they're able to dominate the game from somewhere other than the batter's box as an offensive player. But gosh, that was so exciting to watch. Whether you were a fan of his or his team was playing your team or not, just his ability to draw attention away from the catcher and the pitcher to have to focus on him. So, at any given moment, 40% of the attention had to be geared on, okay, this guy is going to be a problem. He remains a problem. That was just so exciting. I love that brand of baseball.
Well, the guy gets on first base, right? Guy gets on first base, and not just Ricky. There was also Vince Coleman.
Yeah.
There was Tim Raines. There were any number of others. Gets on first base in a close game, especially if it's toward the end of the game, and all the attention went to that player.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of anticipation with every pitch. Is this the one he goes on?
Yeah.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
And that's gone now.
Yeah.
There literally isn't a single player in the major leagues who gives you that feeling more than once every month or so. Not to say the guys don't steal bases. There are still a few players who steal 30-plus bases. Not many, but some. But it's a surprise. There's not that anticipation that makes those moments so exciting. All we're doing is sitting there waiting for someone to hit a home run.
Yeah.
And that, I shouldn't preach. I've done enough of that already, but it's just not the game that it could be, and that's what's frustrating.
I was watching a game recently, and it was Cody Bellinger was on third, and they had a shift on, and so he was free to go, past the coach's box. I mean, he's halfway to home. And I'm at some point, there has to be a scenario where he can just go because he's so, what are you going to do? You can't beat him back to third because there's nobody within 60 feet of third base, So at some point, maybe it's an even thing, but he's so fast. And I just, go. Just steal home. As soon as that pitcher comes anywhere near set, especially if he's left-handed, just go. And
right.
I want to see that, but for whatever reason, and I know I'm way oversimplifying how challenging that particular thing is, but it's not a 20-foot lead. It's like a 50-foot lead. It's huge. I would love to see more of that. That's like a viable penalty to having, that much of a shift where, the third baseman's playing, double play depth for a shortstop. I don't know. Something will have to change at some point. Maybe Major League Baseball, changes the balk rule and puts in a more restrictive windup, to allow.
Well,
more
they've done that in the Atlantic League this season.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah,
literally has to step off the rubber before making a move to first base or second. So the stolen base rates are way up in the Atlantic League.
Yeah.
It's not enough to move the needle on run scoring much at all because steals, frankly, aren't as important as people think they are. But it does result in a lot more steals. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if MLB doesn't adopt that rule within a year or two just to get more speed into the game.
Yeah. It's always struck me as funny as, the balk rule is meant to protect the runner from being tricked,
right.
But every single move that they make is about being tricked.
Yes.
They have people yelling back so that you can't be tricked. It took a lot away from the game. I want to see. I used to remember Willie Wilson, Willie McGee, all those guys when they had the AstroTurf, and you could see them off of the dirt part in the grass or the turf part, just a mile from first base, challenging the pitcher to throw over there and try to beat him. You're right. That was so exciting. I would love to see more of that part of the game.
Well, do you remember when we were kids? There was this great innovation in the 80s because there were so many steals. Maybe it was even the 70s when Lou Brock was stealing so many bases. But there was this innovation where they'd show the split screen.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yeah.
You'd see the pitcher on one side.
Yes.
And you'd see the base runner taking his lead on the other side. Because at that moment, that's what the game was.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they even bother to ever do that anymore because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No, it rarely means anything.
Does anybody take just a massive lead anymore? I mean, I know Billy Hamilton, when he gets on base, takes a pretty good one, but is anybody taking that just, I dare you to throw over here size lead?
That's a good question. I think it happens, but I have such a I couldn't tell you who's leading the league in steals. I think Christian Yelich has stolen a bunch of bases, and there are a few other guys who are on pace for 35 or 40. But it's not a story.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's not important.
And 35 and 40 would that's like Steve Sax territory. No one's like screaming crazy about Steve Sax's fantastic running ability. Yeah, he was a good base stealer, but that's not 80.
No. No, we are in a drought now that we haven't seen since the 1950s, when basically nobody stole bases, with the exception of, I guess, Luis Aparicio. When he came to the league, he stole some bases, and then of course in '62 you have Maury Wills.
Yeah.
But now we're back to the pre-Wills, pre-Aparicio days now, and it's not as much fun.
Yeah, I like those kind of players, and I Maury Wills, you watch video, it's like, how can you not be excited about how he played? Hey, let's talk real quick before we run out of time here. Let's talk about some playoff baseball, because this will probably go up right before the playoffs start. What are your thoughts on Major League playoffs? What are your predictions?
Well, I don't have any great predictions except that the best teams typically wind up winning. And we know that the best teams are the Yankees and the Astros and the Dodgers.
Right.
Does that mean one of them wins? No, of course not. The Dodgers still haven't won, even though they've probably been the best team in the National League over the last 5 years. There's a part of me that would like to see them win, just so that we could go on to a different story. Also, the Dodgers' history is pretty compelling.
Yeah.
I always pull for the Cardinals a little bit because of family ties. I'd love to see the A's win a World Series. It's been way too long for them. And they look like, as we speak, a pretty good bet to make the playoffs, although they're essentially one of 3 teams fighting for 2 wild card slots. So
right.
By no means a sure thing. I think the one question that people have is, can the Yankees do well in the postseason with their relative paucity of starting pitching? I don't know. They're going to wind up winning so many regular season games. I don't know that postseason baseball is that much different than the regular season. But you look at their potential rotation, and you think about them having to face the Twins, who had a gazillion home runs this season, and the Astros, who are just outstanding as usual. And you have to be a little skeptical about the Yankees, but they can also bludgeon people into submission if they're reasonably healthy. So, nothing really stands out. I don't think there's any true favorite except for maybe the Astros, because obviously with their top 3 starters, you're looking at potential shutout every game, and nobody else can really say that.
Yeah, which makes me think, when I think about playoff roster construction, going with a really small rotation, so you have the ability to take advantage of handedness offensively as early and as often as possible. I don't know that you could get away with 9 pitchers, but 10 seems like you could do that pretty easily in a 7-game series, and then get the advantage of having all of those bats on the bench.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't remember what teams have been doing lately. I feel like every year they have more pitchers on their postseason roster than makes sense to me.
Right.
They always seem to have 1 or 2 guys who they're not going to use this unless they're in a blowout. And if you're in a blowout, why not just use a position player? I mean, if you're down 10-2 in the 7th, I know nobody does it. I can't remember the last time a position player was used as a pitcher in the postseason, but why not? Why is it different? I don't get it.
It almost happened in that super long extra inning Red Sox Dodger game. That was going to come. And then you wonder what happens if that game had gone any longer, they would have run out of all of the players and had to do something unprecedented, but ultimately it was decided. I guess for the record, I will say that, I don't see many scenarios where you don't see the Dodgers against either the Yankees or the Astros, except for the baseball gods don't oblige those kind of predictions. So I will.
That's right. No, there will be at least one surprise team in the World Series, most likely.
Right, has to be, right? So who's your surprise team? That's more fun.
Who's my surprise team?
Yeah.
Well, I'm I'm gonna pick the A's because I want them to win. I always wind up once I was freed from the idea that I was smart enough to know who was going to win.
Right.
I just began every year. I started picking the teams I wanted to win.
Okay.
And I want the A's to win. I want to see them wearing those Kelly green uniforms in October, and I want that is it the millstone? Is that what the term, the millstone, to finally be taken off of Billy Bean's neck? I'm sure I'm completely mangling that metaphor, but anyway, I'm tired of people saying the A's can't win the big one, and I want them to win.
Yeah. All right, then I'll take from my wild one. I'll do the same thing, but I won't pick the A's as much as I like the white cleats and they're my hometown team. I will take the Indians because, gosh, they certainly have waited a long time to get to where they are. Although the Twins would be pretty exciting, except for they, of all these teams we just talked about, they've had to wait the least amount of time. I do like the parity balancing, like the Royals getting their win, not quite at 35 years or wherever it was, okay, that keeps them pretty much in line with once every 30-ish years or so. So I'll take the Indians.
No, the Indians are a great choice. I would also love to see them win, especially now that Wahoo's gone. So absolutely. If I would be thrilled if the A's and the Indians wound up, one of them ended up in the World Series. It'd be really easy for me to root for either of those teams.
Everybody, you should listen to the SABRcast, the SABRmetrics Association's podcast that Rob Neyer hosts every week. The shows come out. They're fantastic. He's had Bud Selig on as a guest. David Cohn has been on. All kinds of people in and around the game, not just like the big players, but folks who write about it, folks who make products for baseball. It's just, I just love it. And everybody on there is at their heart a fan of the game. And so just you guys have great conversations, and I really enjoy anytime we get a chance to talk, but also I enjoy being able to hear you guys create that show. It's fantastic.
Well, it's kind of you to say. It's sort of, for me, it's a dream. It's a dream job. Every week I get to choose someone off this huge list I've compiled of people who I want to have a conversation with, and I don't really think of it as a show. It's just me talking about baseball and interesting pieces of research or whatever it might be with all these amazing people. So it's been a wonderful experience doing it.
And my offer to you, and it's certainly self-serving, is if I can ever fill a role underneath your commissionership, be it assistant commissioner or punishment czar or something like that during those summer months when you have help, I'll gladly donate a given number of hours to have the title that I was in baseball at one point. and do a fair job at it. But if you ever need help, you let me know, and I'm glad to do the work just for the title.
Well, you've already been a tremendous resource for me, and I really appreciate it. It's been a blessing just getting to know you.
Yeah, same. And Rob sent me a ball. It's his ball as the commissioner, and he signed it on the back. So, yeah, I got this great ball, and I really appreciate it. Hey, Rob, thanks so much. I really appreciate you.
I always love doing it. Thanks for having me.